She blindly trusted the man she loved, never suspecting that he was secretly stealing everything from her. Her own husband drained her fortune to live a life of luxury with another woman. But fate is unforgiving, and a shocking revelation would soon make him regret everything. The problem? Time doesn't turn back, and he was about to learn that some betrayals come at a price too high to pay. The glittering skyline of New York City stretched out before Harper Underwood as she stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her penthouse apartment. The soft glow of the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, casting a warm light across the luxurious space. At 35, Harper was the epitome of success, poised, accomplished, and heir to one of the city's most influential families. Her reflection in the glass told a story of careful cultivation. Harper's dark hair was swept into an elegant updo, her emerald eyes sharp and discerning. The tailored navy dress she wore spoke of understated wealth, a hallmark of old money and refined taste. As she absently twisted the large diamond ring on her finger, her mind wandered to the journey that had brought her here. The Underwood name had been synonymous with power and prestige for generations. Harper's great-grandfather had laid the foundation of their empire during the Roaring Twenties, turning a small textile mill into a diversified conglomerate. Each generation since had expanded their influence, weaving the family's tendrils deeper into the fabric of New York's elite society. Growing up, Harper had felt the weight of expectation on her shoulders. As an only child, she was the sole heir to the Underwood legacy. Her childhood had been a carefully orchestrated series of lessons, in etiquette, in business, in the delicate art of wielding influence. She'd excelled at it all, driven by an innate desire to make her family proud and a genuine passion for the empire she would one day lead. Harvard Business School had honed her natural talents, and by the time she graduated, Harper was more than ready to take her place in the family business. Under her guidance, Underwood Industries had flourished, expanding into new markets and embracing cutting-edge technologies. The business world watched in admiration as she deftly navigated challenges that would have sunk lesser leaders. But it wasn't just in the boardroom that Harper shone. She was a fixture in New York's social scene, her charity galas and fundraisers the talk of the town. The society pages loved her, the brilliant businesswoman with a heart of gold, always impeccably dressed and unfailingly gracious. And then there was Dixon. The sound of a key in the lock pulled Harper from her reverie. She turned, a smile already forming on her lips as her husband stepped into the apartment. Dixon James was everything she'd ever dreamed of in a partner, handsome, charming, and every bit as ambitious as she was. "There's my girl," Dixon said, crossing the room in long strides. He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close for a kiss. "How was your day?" Harper leaned into his embrace, inhaling the familiar scent of his cologne. "Productive," she replied. "We closed the deal with Sakura Tech. Their AI innovations are going to revolutionize our manufacturing process." Dixon's eyes lit up with genuine excitement. "That's fantastic, Harp. I knew you'd nail it." He gave her another quick peck before moving to pour himself a drink. "We should celebrate. How about dinner at Le Bernardin?" As Harper watched him fix his usual whiskey neat, she marveled at how seamlessly Dixon had integrated himself into her world. They'd met at a charity auction 3 years ago, where Dixon had been representing a group of Silicon Valley investors. His quick wit and insightful comments on market trends had caught her attention, and by the end of the night, she'd found herself utterly charmed. Their whirlwind romance had been the stuff of fairy tales. Dixon had wooed her with grand gestures and intimate moments alike. He sent flowers to her office, whisked her away for surprise weekends in Paris, and spent hours discussing business strategy with her over late-night takeout. When he proposed after just 6 months, Harper hadn't hesitated to say yes. The Underwood family had welcomed Dixon with open arms. Harper's father, the formidable Jonathan Underwood, had been particularly impressed by Dixon's business acumen and drive. "He's got the hunger," Jonathan had told Harper approvingly. "He'll be a real asset to the family." And he had been. Since their marriage, Dixon had thrown himself into Underwood Industries with gusto. His tech industry connections had opened new doors, and his innovative ideas had breathed fresh life into some of their more stagnant divisions. Harper had never felt more supported or understood. "Earth to Harper," Dixon's voice broke through her thoughts. He was looking at her with a mixture of amusement and concern. "You okay there, sweetheart? You seemed miles away." Harper shook her head, banishing the momentary melancholy that had settled over her. "Sorry, just lost in thought." "Dinner sounds wonderful. Give me a few minutes to freshen up." As she made her way to their expansive walk-in closet, Harper's phone buzzed with a text. It was from her best friend, Olivia Thornton. "Girl, we need to talk. Lunch tomorrow? It's important." Harper frowned slightly. Olivia, a high-powered attorney and fellow fixture of New York society, wasn't one for dramatics. If she said something was important, it usually was. Harper fired off a quick reply confirming their usual spot at 11 Madison Park. In the bedroom, Dixon was already changed and ready to go, looking dashing in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. As Harper slipped into a sleek black dress, she caught him watching her in the mirror, a look of pure adoration on his face. "How did I get so lucky?" he murmured, coming up behind her to zip her dress. Harper turned to face him, smoothing his lapels. "I ask myself the same thing every day," she replied softly. As they made their way out of the apartment arm in arm, Harper couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't anything she could put her finger on, just a vague sense of unease that had been growing over the past few weeks. Maybe it was just the stress of work, or the constant pressure of living up to the Underwood name. In the elevator, Dixon's phone chimed. He glanced at it, a small frown creasing his brow for just a moment, before his face smoothed back into its usual charming smile. "Roberts," he explained, naming one of his business associates, "wants to set up a meeting about that new tech startup I was telling you about." Harper nodded, but something in his tone didn't quite ring true. She pushed the thought aside. This was Dixon, after all. Her rock, her partner, the man who had stood beside her through every triumph and setback of the past 3 years. As they stepped out into the bustling New York evening, a cool breeze ruffled Harper's hair. She took a deep breath, letting the energy of the city wash over her. This was her world, a world of wealth, of power, of carefully cultivated relationships and long-held traditions. A world where appearances could be deceiving, and where trust was the most valuable currency of all. Little did Harper know, as she and Dixon slid into the back of their waiting town car, that her perfectly constructed world was balanced on a knife's edge. In the coming days, everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and legacy would be called into question. The lessons her family had instilled in her, about power, about trust, about the true nature of success, would be put to the ultimate test. For now, though, Harper Underwood was still the golden girl of New York society, the heir to an empire, a woman who seemed to have it all. As the car pulled away from the curb, carrying them towards another glittering evening in the city that never sleeps, the first domino in a long and treacherous line was already beginning to tilt. The stage was set, the players were in place, and somewhere in the shadows of the city, unseen forces were moving, ready to shatter the illusion of perfection that Harper had spent a lifetime building. The following day, Harper found herself seated across from Olivia at their usual table in 11 Madison Park. The restaurant's understated elegance provided a perfect backdrop for their lunch meetings, a tradition they'd maintained since their days at Harvard. Olivia looked uncharacteristically nervous, fidgeting with her napkin as they waited for their orders. "Harper, there's something I need to tell you," she began, her voice low and serious. "I overheard something at the courthouse yesterday that, well, it involves Dixon." Harper felt a chill run down her spine, but she kept her face carefully neutral. "What about Dixon?" Olivia hesitated, then plunged ahead. "There's a rumor going around that he's been making some unusual investments. High-risk stuff, way outside his usual portfolio. And there's talk of a new woman in his life, someone he's been seen with at some less than reputable establishments." For a moment, Harper felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. But years of boardroom negotiations had taught her to mask her emotions. She took a sip of water, buying herself time to process. "I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation," she said finally, her voice steady. "Dixon's always looking for new opportunities, and you know how people love to gossip." Olivia nodded, but the concern in her eyes didn't fade. "Just be careful, okay? Keep your eyes open." As they moved on to lighter topics, Harper's mind raced. She trusted Dixon implicitly, but Olivia's words had planted a seed of doubt that she couldn't quite shake. Over the next few weeks, Harper found herself paying closer attention to Dixon's behavior. At first, everything seemed normal. He was as attentive and loving as ever, surprising her with flowers and impromptu date nights. But slowly, Almost imperceptibly, she began to notice small inconsistencies. There were the late nights at the office that became more frequent, the hushed phone conversations that ended abruptly when she entered the room, the slight hesitation before he answered questions about his day. One evening, as they prepared for bed, Harper casually asked about a large withdrawal she'd noticed from their joint account. Dixon's explanation about a potential investment opportunity sounded plausible, but there was a flicker of something: guilt, anxiety. In his eyes, that set her on edge. "It's a really exciting startup," Dixon enthused, his charm cranked up to full wattage. "Cutting-edge AI technology that could revolutionize the finance sector. I wanted to get in on the ground floor." Harper nodded, smiling, despite the knot forming in her stomach. "Sounds interesting. I'd love to hear more about it sometime." Dixon's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll set up a meeting with the founders. You'll be impressed, I promise." But the meeting never materialized. Whenever Harper brought it up, Dixon had a ready excuse. The founders were traveling, they were in a crucial development phase, the timing wasn't right. Each explanation was perfectly reasonable, yet the accumulation of deflections began to weigh on her. At work, Harper threw herself into her projects with renewed vigor, as if she could bury her growing unease in spreadsheets and strategy meetings. She was in the middle of a particularly challenging negotiation with a stubborn board of directors when her assistant interrupted with an urgent message. "Mrs. Underwood, there's a Ms. Aubrey Cartwright here to see you. She says it's regarding Mr. James and that it's extremely important." Harper felt her heart rate quicken. The name was unfamiliar, but something in her assistant's tone set off alarm bells. "Send her in, please." Aubrey Cartwright swept into the office like a summer storm, all golden hair and designer labels. She couldn't have been more than 25, with the kind of ethereal beauty that turned heads wherever she went. But it was the look in her eyes, a mixture of determination and barely concealed hostility, that caught Harper's attention. "Mrs. Underwood," Aubrey began, her voice dripping with false sweetness, "I think we need to have a little chat about your husband." For the next 30 minutes, Harper listened with growing horror as Aubrey spun a tale of secret meetings, lavish gifts, and promises of a future together. She presented no concrete evidence, but the details she knew about Dixon's life and habits were too specific to be mere fabrication. "I'm telling you this because I think you deserve to know," Aubrey concluded, her mask of concern slipping to reveal a glimmer of satisfaction. "Dixon's been playing us both, and I for one am tired of being second best." After Aubrey left, Harper sat in stunned silence, her mind reeling. Part of her wanted to dismiss the entire encounter as the ravings of a delusional woman, but deep down, she knew that Aubrey's story explained too many of the inconsistencies she'd been noticing. That night, when Dixon came home, Harper was waiting for him in the living room, a glass of untouched wine on the table beside her. "We need to talk," she said, her voice calm despite the turmoil inside her. Dixon's face registered surprise, then concern. "Of course, sweetheart. What's wrong?" "I had an interesting visitor at the office today," Harper began, watching Dixon's reaction carefully. "Aubrey Cartwright. Does that name ring a bell?" The color drained from Dixon's face, but he recovered quickly. "Aubrey? Oh yes. I think she's involved with that startup I was telling you about. Did she come to pitch you on the investment?" The lie was so smooth, so convincing, that for a moment Harper almost believed it. But she'd seen that flash of panic in his eyes. "That's not why she came, Dixon, and I think you know it." What followed was a masterclass in manipulation. Dixon expressed outrage at Aubrey's lies, painting her as a disturbed woman obsessed with him after a single business meeting. He was hurt that Harper would even consider believing such ridiculous accusations. By the end of the conversation, Harper found herself apologizing for doubting him, but as she lay awake that night, listening to Dixon's steady breathing beside her, the doubts crept back in. She realized with a sinking feeling that she no longer knew who to trust, her husband of 3 years, or a stranger with an axe to grind. The next few weeks were a study in cognitive dissonance. On the surface, everything remained normal. Harper and Dixon attended charity galas, hosted dinner parties, and continued to present the image of a perfect power couple. But beneath the smiles and small talk, Harper felt as if she were drowning. She began to investigate quietly, using the resources at her disposal as an Underwood, a discreet inquiry here, a carefully worded question there. Slowly, a picture began to emerge, and it was far worse than she had imagined. The startup Dixon had claimed to be investing in didn't exist. Instead, Harper uncovered a complex web of shell companies and offshore accounts, all leading back to a series of high-risk, potentially illegal investments. And at the center of it all was Dixon, playing a dangerous game with money that wasn't his to lose. As the evidence mounted, Harper felt as if she were watching the foundations of her life crumble. The man she had loved, the future she had planned, it was all built on a lie. But even as her personal world tilted on its axis, she knew she had to keep up appearances. The Underwood name was at stake, and she wouldn't let her family's legacy be tarnished by scandal. It was at her parents' annual midsummer gala that everything came to a head. The event was in full swing, the cream of New York society mingling in the Underwood's palatial Hamptons estate. Harper was in the middle of a conversation with a potential investor when she saw Dixon slip away from the crowd, heading towards the secluded gardens. Excusing herself, Harper followed at a discreet distance. As she rounded a hedge, she saw Dixon in an intimate embrace with none other than Aubrey Cartwright. The sight knocked the breath from her lungs, but it was their conversation that truly chilled her to the bone. "It's almost done," Dixon was saying, his voice low and urgent. "Another week, maybe two, and we'll have everything we need. The Underwoods won't know what hit them." Aubrey laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "And then it's goodbye New York. Hello, Cayman Islands." "You know it, baby. Just a little more patience." As they sealed their pact with a kiss, Harper retreated silently, her mind racing. The betrayal she could handle, painful as it was. She was an Underwood, and Underwoods were nothing if not resilient. But this was more than infidelity. This was a direct threat to everything her family had built. Back at the party, Harper moved through the crowd like a ghost, her smile fixed in place even as her world collapsed around her. She watched Dixon charm her father, saw him shake hands with the mayor, observed as he played the role of devoted husband to perfection. In that moment, Harper Underwood made a decision. She would not be a victim. She would not let this man, this liar, this thief, destroy everything she held dear. As the last strains of music faded and the guests began to depart, Harper was already formulating a plan. The game was on, and Dixon James had no idea what he was up against. Harper might have been blind before, but now her eyes were wide open. And heaven help anyone who underestimated an Underwood scorned. As she bid the last guest goodbye, her mask of graciousness firmly in place, Harper felt a surge of determination. The real battle was just beginning, and she intended to win no matter the cost. The morning after the gala, Harper woke early, her mind clear despite the turmoil of the previous night. She lay still for a moment, listening to Dixon's steady breathing beside her. How many mornings had she woken like this, feeling safe and loved? Now the sound filled her with a mixture of anger and grief. Silently, she slipped out of bed and made her way to her home office. The house was quiet, the staff not yet stirring. Harper closed the door behind her and booted up her computer, her hands steady despite the racing of her heart. For the next 3 hours, Harper dove deep into the Underwood Industries' financial records. She'd always been meticulous about the company's finances, but now she scrutinized every transaction with new eyes. At first, nothing seemed amiss. The major accounts were in order, the investments performing as expected. But then she noticed it. A series of small discrepancies, amounts so insignificant they'd been easy to overlook. 1,000 here, 5,000 there. Individually they were nothing, but as Harper followed the trail, her blood ran cold. Over the past 2 years, these tiny leaks had amounted to millions. She pulled up their personal accounts next, and the picture became even clearer. Dixon had been siphoning money, not just from the company, but from their joint accounts as well. The startup he'd claimed to be investing in was a ghost, a smokescreen for his real activities. As the full extent of Dixon's betrayal became clear, Harper felt as if she were falling. The man she'd loved, the man she'd trusted with her heart and her legacy, had been systematically robbing her blind. And for what? A younger woman and a life in the Cayman Islands? Tears blurred her vision, but Harper blinked them away angrily. She didn't have time for self-pity. She needed a plan, and she needed it now. Her first call was to Olivia. "I need you to come over," Harper said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "And I need you to bring every financial crime specialist you know." Olivia, bless her, didn't ask questions. "I'll be there in an hour," she promised. Next, Harper called her father. Jonathan Underwood was not a man accustomed to early morning phone calls from his daughter, and his voice was gruff with sleep. "Harper? What's wrong?" "Dad, I need you to trust me," Harper said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Don't react, just listen. We have a serious problem with the company finances. I'm handling it, but I need you to cancel your meetings today and come to the house. Bring Mom and Dad. Don't say a word to anyone, especially not Dixon." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, "We'll be there in 2 hours." By the time Dixon wandered into the kitchen, looking for his morning coffee, Harper had composed herself. She handed him a steaming mug, her smile as warm and loving as ever. "Sleep well, darling?" Dixon grinned, pulling her in for a kiss. "Like a baby. You?" "Oh, I've been up for hours," Harper said lightly. "Couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd get some work done." If Dixon noticed anything off in her tone, he didn't show it. He chatted easily about his plans for the day as he prepared his breakfast, mentioning a lunch meeting with potential investors. "Actually," Harper interrupted smoothly, "I was hoping you could stay home today. My parents are coming over to discuss some family business and I'd really like you to be there." A flicker of something, alarm, annoyance, crossed Dixon's face, but it was gone in an instant. "Of course, sweetheart. Anything for you." As Dixon headed to the shower, Harper allowed herself a grim smile. The trap was set. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Olivia arrived with a team of forensic accountants and legal experts. Harper's parents showed up soon after, their faces etched with concern. Through it all, Harper maintained a facade of calm, briefing everyone in hushed tones while Dixon remained oblivious in their bedroom, preparing for what he thought was a family meeting. It was nearly noon when Harper finally called Dixon to join them in the living room. He sauntered in, all easy charm and confidence, but faltered when he saw the assembled group. "What's going on?" he asked, his eyes darting from face to face. Harper stood, her posture straight, her voice steady. "Dixon, we need to talk about the company finances and our personal accounts, and a woman named Aubrey Cartwright." The color drained from Dixon's face, but he rallied quickly. "Harper, I don't know what you think you've found, but I can explain everything." "Oh, I'm sure you can," Harper replied, her tone icy. "You've always been good at explanations, haven't you? But I'm not interested in your lies anymore, Dixon. I want the truth, all of it, now." What followed was a master class in obfuscation and denial. Dixon wove a tale of misunderstandings and coincidences, painting himself as the victim of circumstance and malicious rumors. He was so convincing that for a moment, Harper felt a flicker of doubt. But then she remembered the cold, hard numbers she'd seen that morning, and her resolve hardened. "Enough," she said, cutting off Dixon's protestations mid-sentence. "We have the records, Dixon. We know about the shell companies, the offshore accounts. We know about Aubrey. It's over." For a moment, Dixon seemed to deflate, the weight of his deceptions finally catching up to him. But then a new expression crossed his face, a mixture of defiance and contempt. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Harper," he snarled. "You think you're so clever, but you're just a spoiled little rich girl playing at being a businesswoman. You don't have the stomach for real power." The room fell silent, shocked by the sudden venom in Dixon's voice. But Harper didn't flinch. "You're right about one thing, Dixon," she said quietly. "I don't have the stomach for your kind of power, the kind that's built on lies and theft and betrayal. But don't you dare underestimate me. I'm an Underwood, and we protect our own." With a nod to Olivia, Harper watched as her best friend stepped forward, a thick folder in her hands. "Mr. James, I'm serving you with papers freezing all your assets, pending a full investigation into financial crimes against Underwood Industries and Harper Underwood personally." Dixon's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward, but Jonathan Underwood was quicker. Despite his age, he moved with the speed and strength of a much younger man, restraining Dixon before he could reach Harper. "That's enough," Jonathan growled. "You're done here, son. Pack your things and get out of my daughter's house." As security escorted a protesting Dixon from the room, Harper felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. She sank onto the couch, her mother's comforting arm around her shoulders. "It's okay, sweetheart," Elizabeth Underwood murmured. "You did well. We're here now." The next few days passed in a blur of legal meetings and damage control. Harper threw herself into the work, determined to understand every aspect of Dixon's scheme and mitigate the damage to the company. She slept little and ate less, running on adrenaline and sheer willpower. It was during one of these late-night sessions, poring over financial records with Olivia, that they made a startling discovery. Aubrey Cartwright wasn't just Dixon's mistress. She was an active participant in his fraudulent activities. Her name appeared on several of the shell companies, and there was evidence of large transfers to accounts in her name. She played me, Harper realized, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. That whole confrontation in my office, it was just another part of their game. Olivia squeezed her friend's hand. We'll get her too, Harper, I promise. As the extent of Dixon and Aubrey's betrayal became clear, Harper felt something shift inside her. The initial shock and pain were giving way to a cold, hard determination. They had tried to destroy everything she held dear, her family, her company, her very identity. Well, two could play at that game. Olivia, Harper said, her voice calm and resolute, I want you to throw everything we have at them. Every legal resource, every connection, every bit of influence the Underwood name carries. I want them to understand exactly who they tried to cross. Olivia nodded, a fierce gleam in her eye. Consider it done. We'll bury them so deep, they'll need a map to find daylight. As dawn broke over the city, Harper stood at the window of her office, watching the sky lighten. She thought about the long road ahead, the legal battles, the public scrutiny, the whispers and stares she'd have to endure. But for the first time since this nightmare began, she felt a glimmer of hope. She was Harper Underwood, heir to an empire and a force to be reckoned with in her own right. Dixon and Aubrey had made a grave mistake in underestimating her. Now they would learn the true meaning of power, not the fleeting thrill of ill-gotten gains, but the enduring strength of integrity, family, and justice. As the first rays of sunlight touched the New York skyline, Harper squared her shoulders and turned back to her desk. She had work to do, a legacy to protect, and a reckoning to deliver. The game had changed, and Harper was playing to win. Little did she know, the true test of her strength was yet to come. As she prepared to face the challenges ahead, fate was preparing a twist that would shake the very foundations of her world and test the limits of her newfound resolve. The weeks following Dixon's exposure were a blur of legal meetings, press conferences, and sleepless nights for Harper. The news of the scandal had broken, sending shockwaves through New York's elite circles. Every day brought a new challenge, a fresh wound to nurse, but Harper faced each one with a determination that surprised even herself. One particularly grueling day, after hours of depositions and strategy sessions, Harper found herself alone in her office, staring at the photo of her and Dixon on their wedding day. With trembling hands, she picked up the frame, tracing the outline of their smiling faces. In a sudden burst of anger and grief, she hurled the picture across the room, watching as it shattered against the wall. As she sank to the floor, sobs racking her body, there was a soft knock at the door. It was Elizabeth, her mother, who wordlessly crossed the room and enveloped Harper in a tight embrace. "Oh, my darling," Elizabeth murmured, stroking Harper's hair. "It's okay to break down. You've been so strong for so long." For the first time since the scandal broke, Harper allowed herself to truly feel the weight of her pain. She cried for the love she'd lost, for the trust that had been shattered, for the future she'd imagined that would never come to pass. Elizabeth held her through it all, a steady presence in the storm of Harper's emotions. As the tears subsided, Elizabeth gently tilted Harper's chin up to meet her gaze. "You listen to me, Harper Underwood. You are not defined by what Dixon did to you. You are strong, you are brilliant, and you will come out of this stronger than ever. Do you hear me?" Harper nodded, drawing a shaky breath. "I hear you, Mum. I feel so stupid. How could I not have seen it?" Elizabeth's eyes flashed with a fierce protectiveness. "You are not stupid. You loved and you trusted. That is not a weakness, Harper. It's what makes you human. Dixon is the one who should be ashamed, not you." Over the next few days, Harper threw herself into building the case against Dixon with renewed vigor. She worked closely with Olivia and a team of forensic accountants, piecing together the intricate web of Dixon's deceptions. As they dug deeper, a clearer picture of Dixon's past began to emerge. He hadn't come from money, as he'd claimed, but from a working-class family in Ohio. His entire persona, the polished manners, the Ivy League education, the tech industry connections, was a carefully constructed facade. He was a con man from the start, Olivia mused, poring over the documents they'd uncovered. "But why target you specifically, Harper? There are plenty of wealthy women in New York. The answer came in the form of an old newspaper clipping. It detailed the collapse of a small tech startup in Silicon Valley, with Dixon's name listed among the company's founders. The failure had left him bankrupt and bitter, nursing a grudge against the elite investors who he felt had abandoned the project too quickly. He wanted revenge, Harper realized, the pieces falling into place, not just against me, but against everything I represent. The old money, the established power structures. He wanted to prove he could outsmart us all. Understanding Dixon's motivations didn't lessen the pain of his betrayal, but it helped Harper process what had happened. She began to see that his actions were about his own insecurities and resentments, not about any failing on her part. As the legal proceedings moved forward, Harper found unexpected sources of support. Her father, never one for overt displays of emotion, became a constant presence at her side during board meetings and investor calls. He fiercely defended her leadership to anyone who dared question it in light of the scandal. Olivia, true to her word, was working tirelessly on the case. She'd assembled a crack team of lawyers and was pursuing every legal avenue to ensure Dixon and Aubrey faced the full consequences of their actions. Even Harper's younger cousin Jake stepped up. A computer whiz who had always felt like an outsider in the family business, he offered his skills to help trace the digital trail of Dixon's financial maneuvers. His dedication touched Harper deeply, reminding her of the strength that lay in family bonds. As weeks turned into months, Harper gradually began to reclaim her life. She threw herself into new projects at work, determined to not just recover from the scandal, but to push Underwood Industries to new heights. She started practicing yoga and meditation, finding solace in the quiet moments of reflection. One crisp autumn morning, as Harper was on her way to a board meeting, she received an unexpected call from Olivia. "Harper, we've got a situation," Olivia said, her voice tense. "Dixon's lawyer just reached out. They want to negotiate a plea deal." Harper's heart raced. "Why now? We've got them dead to rights." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Harper, there's more. Dixon, he's sick, terminal cancer, stage 4 pancreatic. He's got maybe 6 months tops." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Harper gripped the edge of her desk, her mind reeling. "Are they sure? This isn't some kind of ploy." "We've verified it with 3 independent doctors," Olivia confirmed. "It's real, Harper, and it changes things legally. A jury might be more sympathetic given his condition." As Harper hung up the phone, she felt a maelstrom of emotions. Part of her, a part she wasn't proud of, felt a grim satisfaction. Karma, it seemed, had its own plans for Dixon James, but another part of her, the part that had loved him, felt a profound sadness. The news of Dixon's illness spread quickly through their social circles. Harper found herself fielding calls from well-meaning friends and acquaintances, all offering sympathy she wasn't sure she wanted or deserved. How was she supposed to feel about the imminent death of the man who had both loved her and betrayed her so completely? It was during a late-night conversation with her father that Harper finally voiced the question that had been plaguing her. "Dad, what do I do? Do I push forward with the charges, knowing he'll likely die in prison, or do I show mercy?" Jonathan Underwood was silent for a long moment, swirling the scotch in his glass as he considered his daughter's words. "Harper," he said finally, "this isn't just about what Dixon deserves. It's about who you are and who you want to be. The easy path would be to let anger guide you. The harder path, well, that's for you to decide." As Harper wrestled with her decision, she found herself thinking more and more about Aubrey. The young woman had disappeared shortly after the scandal broke, likely fleeing with whatever money she'd managed to squirrel away. Harper couldn't help but wonder if Aubrey knew about Dixon's condition. Did she care? Or had she simply used him as he had used others? In a moment of impulse, Harper reached out to her contacts in law enforcement, asking them to locate Aubrey. It wasn't about revenge, she told herself. It was about understanding, about finding some kind of closure. To her surprise, they found Aubrey quickly. She was living in a small town in Arizona, working as a waitress under an assumed name. When Harper saw the recent photo of her, hair dyed brown, dressed in a shabby uniform, looking tired and far older than her years, she felt an unexpected pang of empathy. As Harper grappled with these complex emotions, the deadline for deciding on Dixon's plea deal loomed ever closer. The terms were clear. In exchange for a full confession and returning a significant portion of the stolen funds, Dixon would serve a reduced sentence under house arrest, allowing him to receive medical treatment. On the surface, it seemed like a reasonable compromise, but Harper knew that accepting the deal would mean giving up the chance to see Dixon truly pay for his crimes in a court of law. It would mean sacrificing the public vindication she had been fighting for. The night before she had to give her decision, Harper found herself walking the streets of New York, lost in thought. She ended up in Central Park, sitting on a bench near the lake where Dixon had proposed. The memory, once so cherished, now felt like a cruel joke. As she sat there watching the moonlight ripple on the water, Harper thought about the woman she had been before all this, trusting, perhaps naive, but also kind and compassionate. She thought about the woman she was now, stronger, wiser, but also harder. Was this hardness a necessary armor, or was it changing her into someone she didn't want to be? Harper closed her eyes, taking a deep breath of the cool night air. When she opened them again, she felt a clarity she hadn't experienced in months. She knew what she had to do. The next morning, Harper walked into Olivia's office, her decision made. But as she opened her mouth to speak, Olivia held up a hand, her face grave. "Harper, before you say anything, there's something you need to see," Olivia said, sliding a folder across the desk. As Harper opened the folder and began to read, her eyes widened in shock. The documents inside would change everything, forcing her to reevaluate not just her decision about Dixon, but everything she thought she knew about the man she had married. In that moment, standing in Olivia's office with the weight of this new information bearing down on her, Harper realized that her journey was far from over. The true test of her character and of the values she held dear was just beginning. Harper's fingers trembled as she flipped through the documents Olivia had handed her. Each page revealed a new layer of deception, a deeper level of betrayal that she hadn't thought possible. The Dixon James she knew or thought she knew was unraveling before her eyes, replaced by a stranger whose actions defied comprehension. Is this verified?" Harper asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Olivia nodded grimly. "Triple-checked. It's all true, Harper. Dixon wasn't just stealing from you and the company. He was involved in a massive international money laundering operation. The cancer diagnosis? It's real, but he's been using it as a smokescreen to move funds offshore and set up a new identity." The implications hit Harper like a physical blow. Dixon hadn't just betrayed her, he'd put the entire Underwood empire at risk. If any of this were tied back to the company, the repercussions would be catastrophic. "What about Aubrey?" Harper asked, her mind racing. "That's the other bombshell," Olivia replied. "She's turned state's witness. Apparently Dixon tried to cut her out of the deal when he realized he was dying. She's not happy about it." Harper leaned back in her chair, her head spinning. The plea deal they'd been considering now seemed laughably inadequate. This wasn't just about her personal betrayal anymore. It was about protecting everything her family had built. "We need to move fast," Harper said, her shock giving way to determination. "Call the DA. We're going to trial, and we're going for the jugular." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Harper worked around the clock with Olivia and their legal team, building an airtight case against Dixon. The evidence they'd uncovered painted a damning picture. Years of careful manipulation, a network of shell companies spanning multiple countries, and a trail of victims that extended far beyond the Underwood family. As news of the expanded charges broke, the media frenzy reached fever pitch. Harper found herself under constant scrutiny, her every move analyzed and dissected by eager reporters. She maintained a stoic facade in public, but in private, the strain was taking its toll. One evening, as Harper was leaving a particularly grueling strategy session, she was cornered by a young journalist. "Mrs. Underwood," the reporter called out, shoving a microphone in her face. "How does it feel to know your husband was living a double life? Do you blame yourself for not seeing the signs?" For a moment, Harper felt her carefully constructed composure crack, but then she felt a steadying hand on her arm. It was Jake, her cousin, who had become an unexpected pillar of support throughout the ordeal. "My cousin has no comment at this time," Jake said firmly, guiding Harper past the throng of reporters. Once they were safely in the car, he turned to her with concern. "You okay, Harp?" Harper let out a shaky breath. "I will be. Thanks, Jake. I don't know what I'd do without you and the rest of the family right now." Jake squeezed her hand. "That's what family's for. We've got your back always." As the trial date approached, Harper threw herself into preparations, determined to see justice served. But even as she steeled herself for the legal battle ahead, she couldn't shake a nagging sense of unease. Something about the whole situation felt off, like there were still pieces of the puzzle she couldn't see. The trial itself was a media circus. Each day, Harper walked into the courthouse under a barrage of camera flashes and shouted questions. She held her head high, her expression neutral, even as her heart raced with anxiety. Dixon, for his part, played the role of the repentant sinner to perfection. He appeared in court looking gaunt and frail, the effects of his cancer treatment evident in his sunken cheeks and thinning hair. More than once, Harper caught him looking at her with an expression that seemed almost pleading. But any sympathy Harper might have felt evaporated when the prosecution began presenting its case. The evidence was damning, the testimony devastating. Former associates of Dixon's came forward, detailing years of fraud and manipulation. Financial experts laid bare the intricate web of his illegal activities. And then, there was Aubrey. When she took the stand, Aubrey was a far cry from the confident seductress who had confronted Harper in her office months ago. She looked small and scared, her designer clothes replaced by a modest suit, her once perfect makeup noticeably absent. As Aubrey began to speak, Harper leaned forward, hanging on every word. The story she told was one of gradual entanglement, of being drawn into Dixon's web with promises of love and luxury. But as Aubrey delved deeper into the details of their relationship and Dixon's illegal activities, Harper felt a growing sense of unease. There were inconsistencies in Aubrey's testimony, small details that didn't quite add up. Harper scribbled furious notes, passing them to Olivia, who nodded in agreement. Something wasn't right. It was during cross-examination that things took an unexpected turn. Dixon's lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Vanessa Reeves, began to pick apart Aubrey's story with surgical precision. With each question, Aubrey grew more flustered, her carefully constructed narrative beginning to crumble. And then, in a moment that would be replayed on news channels for weeks to come, Aubrey broke down on the stand. "I can't do this anymore," she sobbed, her words barely intelligible. "It wasn't supposed to go this far. We were just supposed to... The courtroom erupted into chaos. As the judge called for order, Harper sat in stunned silence, her mind racing. What had Aubrey meant? What was the true extent of her involvement? As the trial progressed, more surprises emerged. Jake, who had been digging into Dixon's digital footprint, uncovered evidence of a third party involved in the scheme, someone with high-level access to Underwood Industries systems. The revelation sent shockwaves through the company, sparking a witch hunt for the mole. Harper found herself questioning everyone around her, unsure who she could truly trust. Even her parents weren't above suspicion. After all, they had welcomed Dixon into the family with open arms. The strain of constant vigilance was exhausting, leaving Harper feeling isolated and paranoid. It was in this state of heightened tension that Harper received an unexpected visitor. She was working late in her office one night when her assistant buzzed her. "Mrs. Underwood, there's a Mr. Callahan here to see you. He says it's urgent." Harper frowned. The name wasn't familiar, but something in her assistant's tone made her pause. "Send him in," she said after a moment's hesitation. The man who entered was in his late 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. He carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone used to being in charge. "Mrs. Underwood," he said, extending his hand, "I'm Patrick Callahan. I was a friend of your grandfather's." Harper shook his hand, her curiosity piqued. "I'm afraid I don't recall my grandfather ever mentioning you, Mr. Callahan." The old man chuckled. "No, I don't suppose he would have. Our association was, let's say, off the books, but I'm here because I owe him a debt and I think it's time I repaid it." Over the next hour, Callahan spun a tale that left Harper reeling. He had been a fixer for her grandfather, handling delicate situations that required a discreet touch. And in the course of his work, he had uncovered information about Dixon James, information that predated his involvement with Harper by years. "Your husband," Callahan said, his voice grave, "is not who you think he is. His real name is Daniel Jacobson. 20 years ago, he was involved in a scandal that nearly brought down one of the biggest banks on Wall Street. He disappeared before he could be charged, and we all assumed he'd fled the country." Harper felt as if the floor had dropped out from under her. "But how? The background checks, the references." Callahan shook his head. "Dixon, or Daniel, is a master of reinvention. He's been playing this game for a long time, Mrs. Underwood. And I'm afraid your family wasn't his first target. As Callahan laid out the full extent of Dixon's past crimes, Harper felt a mixture of horror and a perverse sense of relief. The man she had loved had never really existed. In a twisted way, it made the betrayal easier to bear. But the revelations didn't stop there. Callahan produced documents showing that Dixon's cancer diagnosis, while real, had been dramatically exaggerated for the court's benefit. The treatments he was supposedly undergoing were largely for show. "Why are you telling me all this?" Harper asked when Callahan finally fell silent. The old man's eyes softened. "Your grandfather was a good man, Mrs. Underwood. He helped me when I was at my lowest. I couldn't stand by and watch his granddaughter be destroyed by a con man." As Callahan left, Harper sat in stunned silence, the weight of this new information pressing down on her. She had a decision to make, one that would shape not just the outcome of the trial but the future of her family and her company. The next day, as Harper entered the courthouse, she felt a sense of calm purpose. She nodded to Olivia, who looked at her quizzically, sensing the change in her demeanor. "I need to speak to Dixon," Harper said quietly. "Alone?" Olivia started to protest, but something in Harper's expression stopped her. "Are you sure about this?" Harper nodded. "Trust me, Liv. I know what I'm doing." The meeting was arranged during a recess. Harper was led to a small conference room, her heart pounding as she waited. When Dixon was brought in, shuffling and leaning heavily on a cane, she had to remind herself that it was all an act. For a long moment they just looked at each other. Dixon's eyes were wary, calculating, even as he maintained his facade of frailty. "Hello, Daniel," Harper said softly. The effect was immediate. Dixon's posture straightened, the weakness falling away like a discarded coat. His eyes, suddenly sharp and alert, fixed on Harper's face. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice devoid of its usual charm. "Long enough," Harper replied. "I know everything, Dixon. Or should I say Daniel Jacobson?" What followed was a conversation unlike any they'd ever had. With the pretenses stripped away, Daniel spoke freely about his past, his motivations, the intricate web of lies he'd woven. He was unapologetic, almost proud of the scope of his deceptions. "You have to admire the artistry of it," he said with a bitter smile. 20 years, Harper. 20 years of careful planning, of building this persona, and it would have worked if not for one tiny mistake." "What mistake was that?" Harper asked, genuinely curious. Dixon's smile faded. "I fell in love with you. Really, truly in love. It wasn't supposed to happen. You were meant to be just another mark, another stepping stone. But somewhere along the way, I started to believe my own lie. I wanted the life we had together to be real." Harper felt a surge of emotions, anger, grief, and a confusing hint of the love she'd once felt for this man. But she pushed it all aside, focusing on the task at hand. "It's over, Dixon," she said firmly. "You can't talk your way out of this one, but I'm offering you a choice." She laid out her proposal. A full confession, not just of his crimes against the Underwoods, but of everything he'd done over the past 2 decades. In exchange, she would use her influence to ensure he received treatment for his cancer in a medical facility, rather than a maximum security prison. Dixon listened in silence, his expression unreadable. When Harper finished, he let out a long, slow breath. "You drive a hard bargain, Mrs. Underwood," he said, a hint of his old charm creeping back into his voice. "But I suppose I taught you well." As Harper stood to leave, Dixon called out to her, "Harper, for what it's worth, I am sorry. Not for the con, that's who I am, but for hurting you. That was never part of the plan." Harper paused at the door, not turning around. "Goodbye, Dixon," she said softly, and walked out of the room. The events that followed would be talked about in legal circles for years to come. Dixon's full confession blew the case wide open, implicating not just himself and Aubrey, but a network of co-conspirators that stretched from Wall Street to Silicon Valley. As the dust settled, Harper found herself facing a new challenge, rebuilding her family's company and reputation in the wake of the scandal. But she was no longer the naive young woman who had fallen for Dixon's charms. She was stronger now, wiser, tempered by adversity. One evening, as Harper was preparing to leave her office, she received an unexpected call. It was from a secure line at the medical facility where Dixon was being held. "Harper!" His voice crackled over the line, weaker than she remembered. "I don't have much time left. The doctors say it's a matter of weeks now. But there's something you need to know, something I didn't include in my confession. Harper's breath caught in her throat. What is it, Dixon? There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of Dixon's labored breathing. When he spoke again, his words would set in motion a chain of events that would shake the foundations of everything Harper thought she knew about her family, her company, and herself. It wasn't just me, Harper, Dixon said, his voice barely above a whisper. I had help from the inside. Someone who's been playing a much longer game than I ever did. Someone close to you. As Dixon began to reveal the final shocking truth, Harper realized that her journey was far from over. The biggest battle of her life was just beginning, and this time, the enemy was closer than she could have ever imagined. The weeks following Dixon's shocking revelation passed in a blur for Harper. His words echoed in her mind, a constant reminder that the web of deceit stretched far beyond what she had imagined. Someone close to you, he had said. Those 4 words had shattered the fragile sense of security she'd been rebuilding. As the legal proceedings wrapped up, Harper threw herself into the monumental task of salvaging Underwood Industries. The company's stock had taken a significant hit in the wake of the scandal, and investor confidence was at an all-time low. But Harper was determined to not only save her family's legacy, but to make it stronger than ever. Her first order of business was a complete overhaul of the company's financial systems. She brought in a team of independent auditors to go through every transaction with a fine-toothed comb. It was a painful process, exposing years of mismanagement and oversight that went beyond Dixon's machinations. But Harper knew it was necessary to rebuild trust. We need to be transparent, she told the board during a tense meeting. Every mistake, every misstep, we lay it all out. It's the only way forward. Not everyone agreed with her approach. Several board members, old friends of her father's, pushed back hard. This could destroy us, Harper, one of them argued. Some things are better left in the dark. Harper fixed him with a steely gaze. That kind of thinking is what got us into this mess in the first place. If you can't get on board with full transparency, I'll accept your resignation now. It was a bold move, one that sent shockwaves through the company. But it also sent a clear message. The old way of doing business was over. Harper was ushering in a new era for Underwood Industries, one built on integrity and accountability. As she worked to rebuild the company, Harper also had to navigate the personal fallout from the scandal. New York's high society, once so welcoming, had become a minefield of whispers and sideways glances. Former friends suddenly had pressing engagements whenever she called. Invitations to galas and charity events dried up, but Harper found she didn't miss that world as much as she thought she would. Instead, she discovered a new circle of support in unexpected places. Jake, her tech-savvy cousin, became her right-hand man in the company's digital transformation. Olivia, ever loyal, continued to provide both legal counsel and emotional support. Most surprisingly, Harper found herself forming a bond with Patrick Callahan, the mysterious friend of her grandfather. His insights into the family's history and the darker corners of the business world proved invaluable as she worked to unravel the full extent of the corruption within Underwood Industries. Your grandfather always said you had the makings of a true leader, Callahan told her one evening as they pored over old company records. He'd be proud of how you're handling all this. Harper smiled, touched by the sentiment. I just wish he was here to help guide me through it. Callahan's eyes twinkled mysteriously. Oh, I think he left you more guidance than you realize. You just need to know where to look. As the months passed, Harper's tireless efforts began to bear fruit. The company's stock slowly stabilized, and new investors, attracted by Harper's commitment to transparency, began to show interest. She spearheaded a series of innovative projects, leveraging Jake's tech expertise to position Underwood Industries at the forefront of sustainable energy and ethical AI development. But even as the business side of her life improved, Harper couldn't shake the nagging fear that had taken root since Dixon's final revelation. Who was the insider he had spoken of? The question haunted her, coloring every interaction with suspicion. She found herself watching her parents closely, searching for any sign that they might be involved. The thought made her sick, but she couldn't dismiss it entirely. They had, after all, welcomed Dixon into the family with open arms. Had that been mere naivety, or something more sinister? Her father, Jonathan, seemed to sense her unease. He began to distance himself from the company's day-to-day operations, citing a desire to let the next generation take the reins. Harper couldn't tell if it was a gesture of support or an attempt to avoid scrutiny. As for Dixon, his story came to a quiet end. True to her word, Harper had ensured he received proper medical care, but the cancer proved too aggressive. He passed away 6 months after his confession, alone in a secure hospital room. Harper received the news with a complex mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a lingering anger that she feared would never fully dissipate. Aubrey's fate took a different turn. In exchange for her cooperation, she received a reduced sentence. The last Harper heard, she was serving her time in a minimum security facility, having undergone a surprising transformation. She had started a program teaching financial literacy to her fellow inmates, seemingly finding a purpose in helping others avoid the mistakes she had made. One loose end that continued to nag at Harper was the identity of the third party Jake had uncovered, the person with high-level access to Underwood Industries' systems. Despite their best efforts, that individual remained elusive, a shadow lurking just out of reach. Whoever it is, they're good, Jake admitted grudgingly after another failed attempt to trace the digital trail. They know how to cover their tracks. Harper nodded, her jaw set with determination. Keep looking, Jake. They're bound to slip up eventually. And when they do, we'll be ready. As the 1-year anniversary of Dixon's exposure approached, Harper found herself in a reflective mood. She stood in her office, looking out over the New York skyline, marveling at how much had changed and how much she had changed. The naive, trusting woman she had been seemed like a stranger now. In her place stood someone stronger, more cautious, but also more compassionate. The betrayal had taught her valuable lessons about trust and vigilance, but it had also shown her the importance of genuine connections. A knock at the door interrupted her musings. It was her assistant, looking slightly flustered. "Mrs. Underwood, there's a Ms. Elena Vasquez here to see you. She says it's urgent and, well, she says she has information about your grandfather." Harper's heart skipped a beat. She had never heard of Elena Vasquez, but anything involving her grandfather couldn't be ignored, especially given Callahan's cryptic comments. "Send her in," Harper said, straightening her jacket and steeling herself for whatever was to come. The woman who entered was in her late 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She carried herself with the confidence of someone used to navigating corridors of power. "Mrs. Underwood," Eleanor said, her voice carrying a slight accent Harper couldn't quite place. "Thank you for seeing me. I apologize for the intrusion, but I have information that I believe you need to hear. Information about your grandfather, about Underwood Industries, and about the person who has been working against you from the shadows." Harper gestured for Elena to take a seat, her mind racing. Could this be the breakthrough she had been waiting for? Or was it another layer of deception? "I'm listening, Ms. Vasquez," Harper said cautiously. "But I hope you understand that given recent events, I'll need more than just your word to go on." Elena nodded, reaching into her bag to pull out a thick folder. "Of course, I wouldn't expect anything less. What I'm about to show you may be difficult to accept, but I assure you, every word is true. Your grandfather and I, we worked together for many years on a project that was never meant to see the light of day. A project that, if exposed, could change everything you think you know about your family and this company." As Elena began to speak, laying out a tale of secret alliances, hidden agendas, and a decades-long game of corporate chess, Harper felt the ground shift beneath her feet once again. She realized that the story she thought had ended with Dixon's confession was only the beginning. The true test of her leadership, her integrity, and her vision for the future of Underwood Industries was about to begin. And as Elena's revelations unfolded, Harper understood that the choices she would make in the coming days would not only determine her own fate, but the fate of everyone connected to the Underwood name. With a deep breath, Harper prepared herself to face this new challenge head-on. She had weathered betrayal, rebuilt her company from the ashes of scandal, and emerged stronger for it. Whatever secrets Elena Vasquez was about to reveal, Harper knew she was ready to face them. As the sun set over New York City, casting long shadows across her office, Harper Underwood steeled herself for the next chapter in her family's complex legacy. The game, it seemed, was far from over. 5 years had passed since Elena Vasquez walked into Harper Underwood's office and turned her world upside down once again. The New York skyline had changed in that time, new towers reaching towards the heavens, but the view from the top floor of Underwood Industries remained as breathtaking as ever. Harper stood at the window, a cup of coffee cooling in her hand as she watched the city wake up. At 40, she cut a striking figure, confident, poised with a few strands of silver at her temples that she wore like a badge of honor. Each one, she joked to friends, represented a crisis averted or a victory hard won. The revelations Eleanor had brought that day had indeed changed everything. The project her grandfather had been involved in, a complex web of international alliances and corporate maneuvering, had been designed to position Underwood Industries at the forefront of a new era of global business. But it had also opened the door to corruption and manipulation on a scale Harper could scarcely have imagined. The insider Dixon had hinted at in his final days turned out to be none other than Jonathan Underwood, Harper's own father. The discovery had nearly broken her, but in the end, it had only strengthened her resolve to clean house completely. The legal battles that followed had been brutal. Jonathan fled the country, his reputation in tatters. Harper's mother, Elizabeth, devastated by her husband's betrayal, had retreated from public life entirely. Last Harper heard, she was living quietly in a small town in Vermont, finding solace in volunteer work and gardening. Aubrey, upon her release from prison, had made good on her promise to turn her life around. She now ran a successful non-profit, helping white-collar criminals reintegrate into society and use their skills for good. She and Harper had even collaborated on a few projects, their shared history giving way to a cautious but genuine respect. Jake had risen to become the CTO of Underwood Industries, his technological innovations helping to propel the company into a new era of ethical tech development. He and Harper made a formidable team, their familial bond strengthened by the trials they had faced together. Olivia remained Harper's closest friend and trusted advisor. She had recently been appointed as a federal judge, her unwavering integrity during the Underwood scandal catching the eye of those in power. She and Harper still met for their weekly lunches, a tradition that had endured through all the upheaval. Patrick Callahan had passed away peacefully in his sleep 2 years ago, but not before sharing with Harper a wealth of knowledge about her family's history. His insights had proven invaluable as she navigated the complex legacy she had inherited. As for Eleanor Vasquez, she had become an unexpected ally. Her vast network of connections, built over decades in the shadows of global business, now served Underwood Industries in its mission to promote ethical corporate practices worldwide. Harper's reverie was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Her assistant poked her head in. "Mrs. Underwood, the board is ready for you." Harper nodded, setting down her coffee cup. "Thank you, Sarah. I'll be right there." As she gathered her materials for the meeting, Harper caught sight of a framed photo on her desk. It was a picture of her grandfather, taken long before she was born. His eyes seemed to twinkle with a secret knowledge, and Harper found herself smiling back at him. "I hope I've made you proud, Grandpa," she murmured. The boardroom fell silent as Harper entered. The faces around the table were a mix of old and new, trusted allies who had stood by her through the storm, and fresh talent brought in to inject new ideas into the company. All of them looked to her with respect, and perhaps a touch of awe. "Good morning, everyone," Harper began, her voice clear and confident. "Before we start, I want to thank you all for your hard work over the past quarter. Our ethical AI initiative is gaining traction faster than we anticipated, and our sustainable energy division has just secured a major contract with the EU." There were nods and smiles around the table. Harper paused, taking in the moment. 5 years ago, she couldn't have imagined being here, leading a company that was not just profitable, but was actively working to make the world a better place. "But we're not here to rest on our laurels," she continued. "Today I want to discuss our next big move. It's risky, it's ambitious, and if we pull it off, it could change the face of corporate responsibility forever." As Harper laid out her vision, she felt a familiar surge of excitement. This was what she had been working towards all these years, a chance to redefine what a corporation could be, to prove that profit and ethics weren't mutually exclusive. The meeting stretched on for hours, filled with spirited debate and collaborative problem-solving. By the time it ended, the energy in the room was palpable. They were on the cusp of something big, something that could leave a lasting impact on the world. As the board members filed out, Jake lingered behind. "That was incredible, Harper," he said, grinning. "You've really outdone yourself this time." Harper smiled back, feeling a wave of affection for her cousin. "I couldn't have done it without you, Jake. Any of it." Jake's expression grew serious. "Listen, there's something I need to tell you. I've been doing some digging, following up on some of Elena's old contacts. I think I might have found your father." Harper felt her breath catch. Despite everything, the mention of her father still had the power to shake her. "Are you sure?" Jake nodded. "Pretty sure. He's in Buenos Aires, living under an assumed name." "What do you want to do?" For a moment, Harper was transported back to that day in the courtroom, watching Dixon's facade crumble. She thought of all the pain, all the betrayal, all the hard-won lessons of the past 5 years. Then she thought of her grandfather, of the legacy he had truly left her, not one of wealth or power, but of integrity and vision. "Book me a flight," Harper said finally. "It's time to finish this, once and for all." As Jake left to make the arrangements, Harper turned back to the window. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, about the woman she had become. She had faced betrayal and come out stronger. She had stared down corruption and refused to blink. She had taken a tarnished legacy and forged it into something bright and new. Whatever came next, whether reconciliation or final closure, Harper knew she was ready to face it, because she was no longer just Harper Underwood, heir to an empire. She was Harper Underwood, architect of her own destiny, guardian of a new kind of legacy. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, Harper smiled to herself. The future, with all its challenges and opportunities, was waiting, and she was ready to meet it head-on. If this story touched your heart, and you want to keep following inspiring and emotional narratives, don't forget to join our community by subscribing to our channel. Speaking of which, if you missed our last video, here's what happened. Desperate to save her daughter's life, a single mother takes on the impossible, offering herself directly to the most powerful man in the city, a tycoon shrouded in mystery and wealth. But when she finally discovers who this man truly is, it feels as though the ground vanishes beneath her feet. Want to know everything that happened next? Click on the video now that's appearing on your screen and witness a story of courage, sacrifice, and an unexpected turn of events that will leave you breathless. See you there.